Hello and welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. I'm Somi Sorang and joining me is our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the program. Welcome to the program. Well, the joys of watching the various disciplines are now in the past, and now is the time to talk about where we go from here. So this week on Foreign Correspondents, the topic is post-Olympics wrap-up. On February 25th, the curtains fell on the PyeongChang Winter Olympics. The foreign media had its gaze firmly fixed on the PyeongChang Winter Olympics. Ranging from their coverage of the colorful opening and closing ceremonies, they also reported on the cutting-edge technology on display at PyeongChang's self-proclaimed ICT Olympics. The athletes who gave it their all were rewarded with a star treatment by many foreign media outlets. The PyeongChang Winter Olympics had to overcome many doubts on its road to success, and now is the time to address the various challenges that remain with the Games in the rearview mirror. Issues regarding the venues and their usage after the Olympics have been frequently brought up by the media. Many of the venues have either been designated as a tourist facility or a training ground for winter sport athletes, but uncertainty is hanging over some of the other venues, with no one stepping up to take custody. To solve this issue, the governor of Kangwon-do province, Choi revealed that discussions were underway for the two Koreas to co-host the 2021 Asian Winter Games. Governor Choi explained that co-hosting the Asian Winter Games will not only guarantee the long-term use of PyeongChang Olympic venues, but it will also promote further cross-border exchanges through cooperation in sports. In response to this proposal, North Korean IOC official Chang Ung said it was a distinct and realistic possibility. Other challenges that remain in the aftermath of the PyeongChang Winter Olympics include the development of winter sport athletes and venues, the use of transportation and accommodation infrastructures, and calculating the real economic benefits of the Winter Games. So let me begin with this question. How successful was PyeongChang 2018?
I think it was a huge success. I remember a couple of weeks before the Olympic, people were very concerned about the security situation. We saw no incident at all. Everything went extremely smoothly. Of course, there is always little controversy, but there was no big controversy, no big doping case. Some cases, but not so many. I think, and from an organization point of view, I was an accredited journalist, and it went very smoothly. It was very easy to go from one place to another. I didn't suffer for any big delay, traffic jam. I think it was a big success.
Big success, all right. What kind of stories did you cover throughout the Games?
Well, actually, mostly I covered politics from here in Seoul, and there was a lot of political sort of developments going on as part of the Games, and it was a really interesting story to of course, follow that and follow through President Moon Jae-in's efforts to make this a Peace Olympics.
And you, Matt?
I too also had to cover a lot of the politics, coming from an American newspaper that sent sports reporters here. A lot of the stories that fell to me were more of the political range. But I tried to, not just cover the diplomatic part of that, but also how it affected the sports. So that, writing about the hockey team, for example.
Right. Now, aside from politics and diplomacy, some of the most talked about issues in PyeongChang 2018 include things like 인면조, that human-faced bird at the opening ceremony. Also, the fact that it cost a fraction of what Sochi 2014 cost. And online, the Swiss skiing team's alternate games, it went viral. So what caught your attention the most?
Well, obviously watching the curling team caught my attention. I thought the opening ceremony was beautiful. And again, much of my attention was focused on the political, machinations that were going on. But I do think the Games were successful, and it was quite exciting to be there and to see how easy it was for foreign tourists to get around. One of the things I really was following was to see what it would be like for someone who might get off a train and not speak Korean and not know how to get around. And it was quite easy, and everyone seemed to be having a good time.
Right, okay.
One of those side stories also to do with the opening ceremonies was the use of the drones.
Yes.
Because as a broadcaster, I'm on the verge of getting a drone myself. And, you know, I want to use it. I'm trying to figure out ways to use it, which is kind of the opposite of how you're supposed to work in journalism, not always try to use this special techie gear for no reason. But I saw those drones, and they definitely had a reason and a purpose. And it was a really beautiful display that they put on for the opening ceremony, and I was scratching my head thinking, how did they do that? How did they organize like what seemed like 1,000, you know, small flying machines all in perfect synchronization? I thought it was really spectacular.
Right, and speaking of drones, there was a drone Olympic torch carrier during the Olympic torch relay as well, which is definitely a world first. So a lot of drones and IC technology being utilized in the games. Now, we talked about what was positive. What were some of the disappointing aspects?
Well, for me, it was seeing some empty seats. I watched the final of the US-Canada ice hockey game, and I might have gone to the game had I known that there would be empty seats. There. I was really kind of surprised to see that. And I looked up what had happened in previous Olympic Games, and I saw that, you know, in many cases, some sponsors had a lot of tickets, or, you know, the tickets were said to have been sold out, but people didn't show up for these events. And so I think that needs to be addressed. While the Olympics earns a lot of revenue through television.
Right.
So that's something I think the IOC is going to need to address in the future.
Right.
I concur. For me, that was really the biggest problem of these Olympics. I covered in figure skating, the final in ice dance,
Sure.
which is extremely popular sport in many countries, including in France. And I was shocked to see so many empty seats. And I interviewed some people, and I realized that the seats were really expensive. And I mean, I understand, I don't blame South Korean public for not coming not spending so much money to an event that's not so popular, but I'm sure there should have been a way maybe to reduce the price of the seat. But I mean, for a final of such an important event, it's really hurtful to see so many empty seats.
So that's a significant disappointment. Now let's talk about particular athletes. So Yoon Sung-bin made history by getting Korea's first ever gold medal in skeleton, and the Korean public fell in love with the Garlic Girls. So what were some Korean athletes that got to your attention?
For me, it was the leader of the curling team. Watching her like intense stare, and the way when she moved the stone down the ice, the intensity and the concentration I found to be pretty fascinating.
And what she kept yelling as
Yeah,
well?
for me, it wasn't the stare, it was the yelling and the shouting.
Young
I
me!
thought that was
Yeah.
really, young me, young me. Yeah, and I think that was really funny to watch how sort of aggressive they were in communicating to their teammates.
I have to say that among all the stories I covered, that was really the one I enjoyed the most writing, especially on the radio, because you can use some extra,
voice clips.
voice of young me, young me. And it's a good human story too. The story of 5 friends coming from the same area, and there is even an aspect that I like is the fact that the reason why this small village, a small city named Uiseong, became so good in curling is because the mayor opened the first curling center in Korea. So there is a lesson in how you need to develop infrastructure first if you want to see good athletes emerging after.
Now, in previous episodes of Foreign Correspondents, we mentioned that the main stadium, where the opening and the closing ceremonies were held, that will be decommissioned now that the Games are over. But as for the rest of the venues that have been built specifically for the Games, there are no plans as of yet on how some of them will be used. So what do you think can be done to prevent them from becoming a white elephant project?
I think there's lots of things that they can do to make use of these facilities. They're great facilities. We visited them just before the Games, and it would be a shame if they were all decommissioned and put out of use. You know, there's a number of ways. So, for example, you could have camps there, winter sport camps for students in South Korea to expose them more to winter sports. One of the curious things about South Korea and its economic success story is that if you go back a generation to, say, your parents, that generation didn't participate in leisure activities to the degree that most people in fully developed countries do.
They didn't have the luxury to.
They didn't have the luxury to. Now, South Korea is a developed country. So I say to that generation and to the next generation, have a good time, enjoy yourself.
It's not just the facilities, there's going to be a bunch of extra housing. So you could see that turning into low-cost office space where startups could move to. There are other ways to generate interest in the area. Obviously, if people in the tourism organization focus more on that, on Gangneung, for example, on that part of the coast during the summer, and how it will be much easier to get there now with the transportation infrastructure, and also easier to find a place to stay. Right. It could become a vacation hub in the way that Busan has for a lot of people in Seoul.
I totally agree. For me, the most important development of this Olympic is the new high-speed train line, the KTX. Now, from Seoul to Gangneung, it takes only 2 hours. By train, it used to take 5 to 6 hours. And I think this is a huge opportunity for all the province, the Kangwon province, and not only to develop leisure activities in South Korea, but as well to invite tourists from Southeast Asia in countries where it's warm and there is no ice, there is no snow. I mean, I really hope tourism can be a way to continue to use all these infrastructures.
Right. Now, one of the elements that has changed due to the Olympics is inter-Korean relations. Pyongyang's participation in the Games has dialed back some of the tensions on the peninsula. So is this a sign of things to come? Let's take a look. On February 9th, South and North Korean athletes marched together at the opening ceremony of the PyeongChang Olympics under the peninsula flag that symbolized unity. It was a symbol of unity amid a sudden thawing of tensions between Seoul and Pyongyang.
그 무엇보다 중요한 것은 우리가 함께 하고 있다는 사실입니다. 우리가 함께 선수들을 응원하며 우리의 미래를 얘기할 수 있다는 사실입니다.
The entire world is watching for any further developments in inter-Korean relations now that the PyeongChang Winter Olympics is over. President Moon Jae-in, while receptive to a possible inter-Korean summit in the near future, has also been cautious in equal measure. The United States, in turn, has also hinted at a possible return to dialogue with North Korea, even as it dials up pressure on the regime.
I think it's important that we're going to need to have some discussions that precede any form of negotiation to determine whether the parties are in fact ready to engage in something that's meaningful.
There's an opportunity for talks that can communicate the fixed policy of the United States of America.
Foreign media outlets are watching for any changes to inter-Korean relations, as well as that of North Korea and the US, in the aftermath of the PyeongChang Winter Olympics. The New York Times expressed worries about the uncertainty over whether Pyongyang is trying to undermine the ROK-US alliance or genuinely interested in resolving its nuclear issue, and that the future of inter-Korean dialogue will hinge on North Korea's true intentions. According to Voice of America, a peaceful resolution to the nuclear crisis on the Korean Peninsula could still be difficult despite renewed signs of dialogue from the US. Professor Robert Kelly, speaking to BBC, says North Korea could request a suspension of joint military drills between South Korea and the US in exchange for the promise of freezing its nuclear and missile programs. The PyeongChang Winter Olympics has tamped down tensions on the Korean Peninsula for now, but it remains to be seen how inter-Korean ties, as well as relations between Pyongyang and Washington, will evolve now that the Winter Olympics is over. Now, in terms of security, during the Games, President Moon Jae-in said that the Games were being held in a, quote, safe environment because of North Korea's presence, North Korea's participation. What do you make of that comment?
I think that that's true. I mean, whether the Games would have been safe or not, had North Korea not participated, we don't know, but there could have been provocations that disrupted things, that caused athletes or their national delegations to be nervous. As we saw in the lead up to the Games, there were some comments about people being nervous. Having them come pretty much assured that there wouldn't be a provocation. And so I think you can say that the Games were safe. I mean, I did a story about how safe the Games were, but they were still, at the same time, incidents of people trying to sneak below fences to get in. There were people trying to bring things in through security that they shouldn't have. So there were a few incidents on the margins, but in general, it felt like it was very safe.
I totally agree. I think inviting the North Korean was the best way to ensure it was safe. And some people criticize the fact that South Korea paid $2.5 million for the venue. I think that's pretty cheap to ensure the safety of such an important international event, and I think all the criticism that the government got after paying with a sum of money that is not so big if you compare it to a state budget,
right.
I think that was not paying much for ensuring the safety of the Games.
And it's certainly not a lot of money if you look at the entire budget for the Games, which was somewhere between, I think, $12 and $15 billion. So an extra $2 million is really nothing. And I feel that, again, President Moon Jae-in succeeded in making these a Peace Olympics, having some type of inter-Korean relations improvement and avoiding the sort of security concerns where prior to the Olympics you had teams threatening to even withdraw from the Games.
Exactly.
Yeah. So again, kudos to the president.
Okay. Now, a South Korean policymaker, a lawmaker, expressed hopes that inter-Korean cooperation during the Games could pave the way for more cross-border exchanges down the line. How hopeful are you that this will happen, that Pyongyang and Seoul will indeed move to that next step?
Okay, well, I give kudos to the president for making these a Peace Olympics. Making these a Peace post-Olympics is going to be another serious challenge because that elephant in the room, North Korea's nuclear and missile programs, is going to rear its head and need to be dealt with in order for both inter-Korean relations to improve a lot and for North Korea to develop a positive sort of trend in their relationship with the U.S. and the international community. Getting from where we are to there is going to be a challenge.
Right.
If the Moon administration can initiate some other sort of projects or exchanges to pave the way closer to those broader talks that need to take place, that might be a good idea. But again, that's also going to be a challenge.
And what are your thoughts on the possibility of the two Koreans having a summit talk? Do you think that can be held without damaging the ROK-US alliance?
Oh yes, I think the summit will not happen unless Moon Jae-in gets green light from his American ally. I'm sure of that. I don't think he doesn't want to undermine the alliance. That being said, it's almost impossible to make prediction with North Korea, so I don't want to do that. But I think a summit will happen only if at least they get North Korea to compromise on some little things. And so far, we don't see that happening, so I would be very careful. And I'm not extremely optimistic, actually, for what will happen after the Paralympics when the military exercise, the South Korea, US military exercise will restart. So we'll see.
Okay, and Matt?
I agree with that completely. I think there are so many steps that have to come together before a summit. And I think you're absolutely right that the summit really can't come together with at least some tacit backing of Washington. But I don't think that Seoul is doing that because that's what Washington wants. I think Moon Jae-in actually believes in denuclearization and sees that as a goal and is not willing to set that aside just for the purpose of a summit. But the fact that there was the North Korean participation in the Games and that they're now talking, we talked about the $2 million for their accommodations. That alone was a budget price to pay for just getting the military hotline reconnected.
Right.
So the whole participation in the Olympics, the fact that there were 3 rounds of inter-Korean dialogue was a great amount of progress, regardless of what happens with the summit.
All right. Now, North Korea remains under heavy sanctions by the international community. So do you think there's a policy discrepancy between Moon Jae-in's administration and the rest of the world? Or do you think President Moon is doing the best he can to keep the dialogue open, the dialogue channels open with North Korea?
I think both of those are true. He's doing the best he can to keep a dialogue channel with North Korea open and develop inter-Korean relations. At the same time, I do believe that there's quite a disconnect and an increasing disconnect between the South Korean government's initiatives with North Korea and the international community, particularly the United States,
right,
which in the Olympics, both prior and during, sought to undermine inter-Korean relations through the comments of U.S. Vice President Mike Pence. So he has a tough sort of road to hoe to get North Korea and improve inter-Korean relations, at the same time satisfy the international community and the U.S. that there is some movement on denuclearization. I disagree with Matt. I think that there may be some analysts within the Moon administration, certainly in the United States, that believes that denuclearization is a boat that's already sailed and that they may need to look to another sort of cap or restraint on North Korea's testing and of both nuclear devices and missiles, and move from there. But it's not something that you're going to see voiced or hear from any officials in either Washington or Seoul.
Right.
And just to clarify, what I meant was that I think few people think that North Korea at this moment is going to give up its nuclear program, but summit can't happen without at least an openness by the North to talking about the nuclear program. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Right. And we've touched upon this throughout the conversation already, but South Korean government said that it will pick up the tab on the North Korean delegation's travel expenses, which, as you mentioned, roughly $2.5 million. So I think the consensus is that it was worth it. But from a sanctions point of view, some people are saying this goes against, it violates North Korea's sanctions. Do you agree with that sentiment?
No, really. I mean, to my knowledge, no cash was given to the delegation. They just pay for the transportation, the accommodation, the food, the tickets, I guess, for the cheerleaders. So I don't think that qualifies actually as sanction. It's not like that we gave, South Korea gave them like dual-use technology or they gave them money. So I was not really convinced by the argument saying that it violates sanctions.
Perhaps from a legal standpoint, the accommodations or the payment didn't violate any sort of sanctions. But the spirit of sanctions, in my mind, are to put pressure on North Korea to think about its actions and to think about its behavior. And that's the one thing that's flooded my inbox from American analysts is that a lot of the North Korea's behavior has been forgiven, or not forgiven, but forgotten because of the game. So I guess you could argue that accommodating them, spending money to make sure that their large delegation was able to come here and have security, in some ways took pressure off of them, which is what the sanctions are intended to do.
Right. Right. Last week, North Korea said that it is fully prepared for both war and dialogue with the US. Do you think there's room for improvement in the relationship between Pyongyang and Washington?
Absolutely. I hope it doesn't get any worse. Certainly, if it was worse, I think we'd probably be at war. So definitely there needs to be some improvement in that relation. The problem is that to get to negotiations, they both have very mutually exclusive conditions that they're placing on that. North Korea is suggesting to the U.S. that Pyongyang needs to be recognized as a nuclear power, and the U.S. is saying you need to put your nuclear weapons and missile programs on the table before we will even sit down with you. There needs to be some type of, they need to find a middle ground and to come to the negotiating table without those conditions and really without any conditions. And if that has to take place on a back channel, then I would certainly support that. And I think that's probably something that you might see happen.
Now, the IOC president, Thomas Bach, is due to visit Pyongyang following North Korea's invitation. What do you think Pyongyang's intention is, and what do you think the two parties will talk about?
Yeah, it remains to be seen. My guess is it's probably an opportunity for him to express his appreciation for their participation and talk about future participation, not only in winter but summer games as well. And perhaps just to show his appreciation for their participation, but also the sort of the image that created about this games and how it did contribute to a sense of safety that wasn't there before.
All right. Do you have any final comments?
I'm sort of forecasting and trying to figure out what's going to happen now after the Olympic Games. There's been a lot of my stories. I covered mostly the political aspects of the games, and they were focused not necessarily on what's going on with the games, but what's going to happen after the games.
I mean, for me, I'm not a sport journalist, so to cover the sport aspect of something was really new, and I unexpectedly enjoyed it. And now, as Frank said, now I'm back to cover the diplomatic and the political development of the Korean Peninsula, and there will be a lot of work ahead.
Yeah, for me, the same. I started thinking, like, what are we going to do now? Because the games itself served as a catalyst for these talks and for a discussion about peace and about dialogue and about North Korea. And when the games go away, that could stall. And so one thing that I've been thinking about is how to cover the aftermath of the games. And then, I've been thinking also about what a great honor it is to be able to be here and to be able to cover this topic. And as an American journalist, it was great fun.
I thought one of the interesting things too is for so long, for like years and years, we've been covering these really negative tension-filled, on the verge of war stories related to North Korea, and that's been why it's been in the international media spotlight. And this time, it was a lot different. It had to do with the Peace Olympics.
Yeah, when I covered the opening ceremony, I felt like, oh, I'm covering something historical. And, I had the feeling, I don't have this feeling very often.
Right.
So it was good.
So perhaps a pleasant break from covering all the negativity.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. All right, the 17 days of PyeongChang 2018 Winter Olympics is now in the past, but I'm sure memories will stay with us for some time, and it remains to be seen how some of the interstate relations will unfold from here. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.